We're continuing to follow breaking news out of California. We're getting reports of a possible active shooter. This is at the YouTube headquarters in San Bruno. It's south of San Francisco. These are live pictures coming in. You can see the heavy police presence there. There were reports of even employees coming out with their hands up. We do know that they heard shots. They are barricading themselves in their office at this point. We're also working to learn more. At this hour, we also know that the San Mateo Sheriff's Office is saying that they are treating this at this point like an active shooter incident. They have no knowledge of exactly who the shooter may be, and they wouldn't even confirm whether this is a gunman or a woman, and whether a weapon has been found at any point. We don't even know if they have had access right onto the premise at this point, if they've entered the facilities. I want to bring in now former Assistant FBI Director and CBS News security analyst Ron Hosko. He joins me by phone. Ron, at this point, what are police trying to do?
Rena, they are trying to sort out good reporting. Are they able to identify first these were gunshots? They came from a person, from multiple persons, trying to find a good witness or two that will perhaps identify a potential shooter, perhaps give them a motive, certainly give them a direction of travel if this was truly an active shooter, somebody bent on some harm on this campus. They're trying to track that person down with all deliberate speed. As you know, in our post-Columbine world, this is not set up a perimeter and wait and try to negotiate. This is go toward the threat. So most certainly law enforcement is trying to identify witnesses that point them in the right direction, maybe point them or tell them a name, give them something to work with as they try to fight through this kind of fog of the first minutes of one of these encounters.
Ron, we're seeing some folks with their hands up in the air evacuating pretty calmly the YouTube headquarters there in San Bruno. When do police know when they can rush a premise and sort of assess what's going on?
You know, they really are dependent on 911 calls, the first reports, and those folks that they can encounter at the scene as they're looking for, evidence that people have been injured, people have been shot and killed, that there are firsthand witnesses, not just whispered. And they try to form an understanding. So this is very much police moving in very deliberately, listening for the sound of gunfire, smelling the air for the smell of expended gunshots, and trying to move in the direction of that gunfire, assuming it is still ongoing.
Yeah.
And that's always an assumption because I don't know if you happen to see it, but the Secret Service just published an intelligence review of last year, a review of last year's active shooter mass shooting incidents. And as you know, very often these events are over extremely quickly, in many cases in under 5 minutes. Yeah. 5 minutes, you really don't have a lot of police there in under 5 minutes.
Yeah. No, that's such a good point. And we're also seeing that the police, San Bruno police, had tweeted out that there's police activity at 901 Cherry Avenue. Please stay out of the area. They tweeted that at 4:01 p.m. Eastern time. We do know at this point, Ron, police confirming that they are responding to multiple 911 calls that they did receive. I don't see the image that we're seeing right now appears to me to be law enforcement looking to be securing the perimeter possibly. What do they have to do when they're trying to do this, Ron?
Well, you certainly want to make sure as part of your response, and of course these responses are all incremental. All the police do not arrive at the same time and throw up a perfect perimeter, but police commanders will be issuing direction to subordinates to make sure that they know the places of egress are covered. Like we saw in South Florida, what you don't want to have is someone who is the offender, who was an active shooter or intends to carry out further destruction, just walking out with the crowd, putting their hands up after they've put a weapon down, maybe concealed it. So they don't want that to happen. So they want to try to control this as best they can. The tension there is getting people quickly out of the building and away from potential harm while they search, while they go floor to floor. It looks as though this is a multi-story a pretty good-sized complex. Almost looks like it's the width and length of a city block, almost half of a block. So you're talking about the need for a lot of police, not only to get in to control the situation, to set up perimeters, but to search it thoroughly, and then start to exfiltrate anybody who might have been injured or seriously hurt as a result of this.
It's pretty remarkable. For folks who aren't familiar with this YouTube facility headquarters, it has a full-length lap pool. It is just this wide, massive space. There are so many different areas in particular in this location. When you have something as vast as this, what pretty much is a compound, Ron, how do you go about securing that area?
Yeah, you really need a lot of law enforcement help very quickly. Fortunately, this is a big urban area. I don't know if you pull back from the shot just a little bit, you can see San Francisco Airport is just off to the east of it, really probably within a mile or a mile and a half of this location. So this is a big urban area. They're going to need a lot of police to do it right. Those police are certainly assembling. In an event like this, where it looks like it's a bona fide incident, certainly they'll be getting help from the FBI, from ATF, probably from the marshals, DHS. Other agencies in the area will be coming to the aid of. These are standard mutual assistance agreements that are expected in our world today. So you'll see other jurisdictions flowing in here to assist San Francisco or San Bruno, the lead agency. And their job is very much to try to control this scene, not only the perimeter, but who's coming out, accounting for everybody that had been in that building, and meticulously going room by room, floor by floor, to identify that this was real, that perhaps there's an offender still loose in the building, identifying who that person is, certainly exfiltrating anybody who might have been injured. This can be a very complex operation, particularly given the size of the structures that are there.
If you're joining us now, we are following an active shooter situation. That's according to the San Bruno Police Department there. Police have now surrounded, coming out in large forces. This is from eyewitness accounts there. We can actually even see it in these live pictures that we're getting. They have responded to this situation. They have tweeted out to avoid this area in the vicinity, and you see these employees, what appears to be employees from YouTube, evacuating the area. At some point, some of them even had their hands up in the air, coming out. You know, Ron, I think about Parkland, and I think about how when those students were evacuated, we saw them, their backpacks, that law enforcement had asked them to throw their backpacks into this area. They had their hands up in the air, and yet the shooter was able to escape with these students. How do you prevent something like that from happening?
As a practical matter, Rena, that is very hard to do when you're talking about any even reasonably sized establishment, whether it's a school, a business like this, where you're talking about something that may be as long as a city block or certainly hundreds of yards long and multiple floors. The practical reality is police cannot assemble there quickly enough to set up the perfect perimeter, while a thoughtful, that is a person who's thought out their attack.
And Ron, sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to point out we are now watching police patting down as we're just having this conversation about how you prevent a shooter from evacuating with the other innocent folks. Police are now patting down what appears to be every single person who is leaving from this one exit facility. Are you surprised by that?
No, I'm not. At some point, they're going to have to make these decisions. And here, you know, a facility like this, you're really dealing with a lot of adults. If you're in an unknown subject situation where you just don't know, you don't have a good subject description, it could be that all they have is reports of gunfire. Maybe they have some injured, but they don't really even have a good description.
Right.
They're going to have to take, I think, responsible steps to determine that the person who brought in a weapon isn't a person who's bringing out that very weapon and going to, you know, hide it, conceal it, or go do other harm somewhere else. So I think here you're talking about adults. You're not talking about a bunch of school kids. They're going to have to establish these kind of command and control procedures and that is filtering people out through a specific and limited number of entrances so that the responding officers can do their work and be assured that the gunman isn't now behind us, isn't going up into a parking structure 50 yards behind us and going to shoot down on us.
Right.
So this is, I think, responsible based on what they presumably know right now. Some command personnel for San Bruno are going to have to make command decisions. They may turn out to be not the best decisions, but you take the facts that you have at the moment and you make the best decisions that you can, and hopefully prevent further harm.
Yeah. Ron, you were mentioning how people are sort of listening in on lots of different social media. Police are, monitoring different accounts as well. How does social media play into, how do you separate fact from fiction? I noticed on Twitter somebody claiming to have a photo of the shooter in an elevator, which just seems so unlikely to be the case. We don't know. How do you separate what is legitimate threats on social media when you're in an active shooter situation like this?
It can be very hard, Rena. Some of these tidbits, have the ring of truth, and it could be that the smallest, least consequential piece that you see pop up actually has some validity to it. The great difficulty that police have in a situation like this is you're doing it in really a time-compressed environment. The crisis is presumably ongoing, and you're trying to assess all of that with great immediacy, knowing only just partial bits of information. Certainly any police officer who is working, looking at leads that may come up on social media, they're going to have a team of folks ultimately doing that and trying to establish what is real, and that very often takes follow-up investigation. It's not just one little piece. Fortunately now, with all of us carrying these smartphones with us, with tweets particularly to family members that may be relayed to law enforcement, or text to a family member, or phone calls to a family member with detailed discussions. As police move about this building, one would think that logically things will settle down some. The people inside will hear calls of police. They'll feel more confident in maybe getting on their phone and texting out or calling and giving some detailed information that police can act upon.
Yeah.
And as you know, one of the factors with all of these active shooters, as police are trying to run their diagnostics and understand motive, is very often these are people who have shown demonstrated grievances in the past. Mm. They've demonstrated against very often the targets that they're looking for, or maybe a general target like an employer. They've demonstrated hostility, anger. They've said things that serve as warnings, and of course that sort of information will be pouring into the police too, because coworkers will have seen, and they will be calling saying, "I knew this guy was ticking like a bomb. It's got to be so and so." And so add that to the mix of what police are going to have to sort through. But those pre-event indicators are very, very common. As I mentioned, this Secret Service study, about 80% of mass attackers had engaged in some sort of threatening communications in the past, very often with the target, the intended target themselves, or with the organization, or demonstrated behaviors that have caused concern for others. So all of that can be helpful in police identifying who this might be.
We are also seeing tweets from the San Bruno police, who are just a matter of minutes ago saying that they are confirming they are responding to an active shooter situation and asking folks to stay away from Cherry Avenue and Bay Hill Drive, which is, of course, the YouTube headquarter facility. Ron, are you familiar with this YouTube compound at all?
Not the compound itself. I've been in and out of the San Francisco airport a few times, and I know that is just, as I mentioned, probably just a little bit over a mile to the east. Wow. Which I'm sure is a concern to air traffic controllers, too, if the notion of somebody this close to a major airport who may be armed and inclined to use it. So it'd be interesting to see how that piece of this plays out.
That's fascinating. So when you're talking about an airport being in such close facility, a major U.S. airport, how does law enforcement proceed?
Well, first, this is essentially restricted airspace to begin with because of its proximity to San Francisco Airport. So law enforcement is going to have to coordinate with the airport authorities, with the FAA regional authorities, if they have a concern that a flight path, perhaps over or near this facility, is in any way jeopardized. You could expect that the San Francisco flight controllers will be moving that air traffic away from this just to mitigate that risk. Whether it is in a flight path, I know very often, of course, depending on the wind and other conditions, the flight path is very often coming in over the bay, and those planes would not be threatened by this location. But to the extent that there are flights that typically come over this facility, I would think they'd be looking hard at moving them further to the north or to the south.
If you're joining us now, we're following this active shooter situation at YouTube headquarters. It's in San Bruno, California, about a mile away from San Francisco Airport. I'm joined by Ron Hosko, CBSN contributor, who's joining me now by phone, extensive experience with the FBI and law enforcement. Ron, we're seeing this wide shot of just how vast the YouTube headquarters really are. When you're talking about just in general, day in, day out, securing a perimeter, I mean, I can count at least 12 police cars that have come to this area, some heavily armed vehicle, fire trucks and ambulances as well, responding to this. But day in and day out, trying to secure this perimeter, I mean, it can't be an easy task.
Oh, not at all. You're really talking about funneling potentially from the size of the building, potentially thousands of employees through a couple of locations. That would be starting by directing them from inside to go to certain locations, assuming they're safe, assuming they're not locked down in specific offices, that you want to channel them through a safe passageway or multiple safe passageways to these egress points where they can be patted down by police on the outside. So you're really talking about a pretty good-sized coordinated effort by law enforcement, by whatever security personnel are working inside the facility day in and day out, coordinating that together to try to chase all of these potential witnesses, potential victims, and employees and workers out to a limited number of areas where they can be patted down, evaluated very quickly, and presumably be made safe on the outside. I'm sure at the same time that they're doing that, they're also keenly interested in, are any of these folks eyewitnesses to a crime, that they have relevant information so that they can get that information very quickly, share it among law enforcement. One of the great challenges that law enforcement has faced long before 9/11, it was certainly brought out into the fore during 9/11, and law enforcement has struggled with after, is radio communications. Because here's a situation where you potentially are going to have dozens and dozens of law enforcement, in addition to other first responders, fire rescue, paramedics, all colliding on a few frequencies, and to try to coordinate that so that all the police have all the information they need to do their work safely, effectively, professionally. It is very hard to do when you're talking about trying to control dozens, if not hundreds, of people from multiple agencies. It's very difficult.
I want to read you, Ron. We are getting, as many of our viewers know, YouTube is a subsidiary of Google, and Google has just tweeted out from their communications handle, regarding YouTube's situation, we are coordinating with authorities and will provide official information here from Google and YouTube as it becomes available. That was just about 10 minutes ago from Google. Obviously, a digital company that's trying to get the word out on a digital platform to let folks know what they know. And at this hour, at this moment, what we do know is that this is an active situation, shooter situation, according to police there in San Bruno. They are now, as you see here, patting down what appears to be employees that have evacuated the building. Ron, we know that with the Parkland shooter, for instance, I'm going back to that, of course, as a recent shooting that took place in our country. The fact that the gunman was able to get rid of that gun and walk away with the students, I mean, isn't it possible if a gunman were to evacuate that, what does this pat down really help prevent?
It may accomplish nothing at all, Rena. The reality is, if an active shooter was going into this facility for a specific purpose, and I mean really targeting a particular coworker, a particular boss, shots were fired, it would be very easy for them to, in any big information like this, put down a gun, hide it, put it in a waste receptacle, put it in any concealment location, and walk out with the crowd. And so the gun is still inside, and the offender has now walked out and tried to blend in with the rest of the coworkers, looking like they had nothing to do with it. That's going to make the law enforcement job much harder. Of course, a part of this investigation is, as always, victimology. Was it a targeted attack on a specific victim or group of victims, a well-defined group of coworkers? If so, very likely they knew who their attacker was. They very likely would know the reason for it, and it could well be that law enforcement already has a name or perhaps has somebody in custody. But that's a piece of this, is trying to identify those witnesses and certainly trying to understand the relationship of any victims to any potential attacker that might have been involved in this.
There are reports that the police are just so overwhelmed. They're getting so many 911 calls, likely from people inside the YouTube headquarters, reporting this active shooter situation. Ron, no one ever expects that they'll be in this type of a situation at work. YouTube couldn't be probably the most peaceful, pretty peaceful working environment. You see the lush trees and the quiet space there. If you find yourself in a situation like this, what's the most important thing to do? Call 911?
Well, first, I will repeat the FBI's mantra, which is run, hide, fight. First and foremost, get away. Try to, in any situation that we go into, whether we're shopping at the mall, at a grocery store, we're at church, we all ought to be at least contemplating the possibility that something bad might happen wherever we are in our world, and have an understanding of where are the exits. What's my way out of here if I have to go quickly? So running is the first choice. While you're running and while you put some distance between you and a potential violent attacker, there's certainly an opportunity in almost most cases to get on the phone and call 911 and report what you've seen, report what you've heard. But first and foremost is to try to put some distance between you and that potential attacker. And then the FBI's guidance is you hide. And now we know that a lot of facilities, whether it's a school or a business, they go into lockdown procedures where they are trying to barricade themselves behind a hardened door, push furniture up against it, remain quiet, call police, tell them your location, tell them what you've seen or what you've heard. But it's really pushing towards concealment and trying to barricade yourself and keep yourself isolated from an attacker if they are loose in the building. And then, of course, the last thing is fight. And that piece is really, I think, an understatement. If you are in that final encounter situation where it is you and an active shooter, it is fight for your life. It is take any weapon available to you, use it as a weapon, and you're really fighting for your life at that point. But, we are certainly hopeful that practice and preparedness and training by business owners, by school officials, by church officials, where that's the last option, because the other options have succeeded and you don't get to that.
Yeah, it's such a good point you mentioned. You don't think about just exactly how important that is. Ron, I want to also mention that we are hearing some reports now. This is coming from San Francisco General Hospital, saying that there are reports that spokespeople there are confirming that they have received multiple patients, in fact, from this YouTube facility. We're talking about a facility of possibly thousands of workers here. This took place within the past hour, is what we know. And apparently there was enough time. We're hearing that folks were taken potentially to this hospital. This is coming from the spokesperson of the hospital, saying that they are receiving patients. When you're hearing that, what comes to mind, Ron?
Well, it's, of course, very troubling. It is. This has happened too often in our country. It will, of course, spur the discussion again about weapons in America. It is very likely to, and when we have that discussion, we very often are having conversations about mental health challenges. We know that both of those issues existed in the case of Nicholas Cruz in Parkland, and in so many other cases before that, where you see this kind of confluence of someone who has anger issues, has mental health issues, has family issues. The range of potential mental health drivers exist, and the ability of someone to go procure a weapon or multiple weapons, get these instruments of destruction. We've seen gaps in the system, regardless of what system it is, whether it is a reporting to law enforcement, reporting to schools, lack of coordination between agencies, clear reports that are not relayed to the right authorities getting clear information and not acting. All of those are out there. I would think if we have reports now of injured or fatalities, it is just going to bring those issues back to the fore and supercharge them one more time.
Ron, if you could hang with us for just a second, I want to bring